Hey everybody, welcome to the Fire It Up with CJ show. Today we are going to be talking about the creative process, specifically about writing, and we are very lucky to have Tina Welling here, and she's going to be talking about her book, Writing Wild. Tina is an author of several books and also teaches writing and actually just did taught during a recent workshop. So we're going to be picking up some tips on the creative process and how to work through some of the most common problems that people have when they're going through creating something new. So welcome, Tina.
Happy to be here, CJ.
Now, one of the things that in your book, Writing Wild, that you talk about is the importance of convening with nature, and I love the idea of writing being a creative process. Meaning it's actually you're creating something just like in and using the energies of nature as a way of guiding your writing. How have you used nature as a guide for kind of germinating and brainstorming and coming up with ideas?
Well, I think that the natural world is the macrocosm, and
Hmm.
we are the microcosm. So, as above, so below. We can follow those patterns that are in the natural world, and the natural world is filled with brand new ideas and energies and things sprouting all the time. And so, basically, watching that, being around writers for a lot of years. I work with the Jackson Hole Writers Conference on the faculty there for about 20 years now.
Hmm.
I realize that a lot of writers depend on the idea that a muse has to come,
Hmm.
and further writing. And I suspected that that wasn't true. And I feel like the natural world validated that we
Hmm.
don't have to have something special going on, something triggering for us, that if we just get into our bodies, we can understand that it has rhythms like the natural world does. And there are times when we just need to take in, and then there are times when it's appropriate to put it out.
Hmm. Okay, so if our bodies are, in fact, there is no muse, but in fact, it's our bodies that are kind of picking up things. What does that mean in practice? So give me an example of when your body was picking up something versus kind of, oh, I had a creative inspiration. It's actually your body kind of as the vehicle
Well,
to
our
doing that.
our body holds all of our emotions, it holds our memories.
Hmm.
And for example, Writing Wild came out in May, so I've been very busy throughout the summer just doing a lot of outer things. And as
Hmm.
soon as that kind of slowed down, I began thinking, oh, I have to decide what my next project is, and all of these different things that I had sort of been thinking about
Hmm.
came to the surface, and I felt this like I was supposed to be producing now. And then
Hmm.
I realized that wasn't really what I wanted at all. What I wanted, what my body wanted, was just to take in. And so I piled a whole bunch of books in my arms, and I went to my porch swing, and I spent I've spent weeks until this big snowfall landed in Jackson Hole here this week, just taking in. And so I plan on doing that until I just feel like something's gathered together and I'm ready to, push something out
Hmm.
again.
Hmm.
So there's just seasons for us.
Yeah, it's interesting because what's interesting about it is that, May is usually the spring where things are blossoming and growing, but it's at the same
Hmm.
time the time that you took your book, Writing Wild, and you'd finished writing it and thought, well, I need a break, right? So it was in some ways your fall or winter where you kind of cozied up and your swing. I love the
Yeah.
juxtaposition of the two kind of there's the nature around you, but then what your inner nature said is, no, I need to relax. It's so hard to do
Hmm.
that though, don't you think? To actually just follow what your body wants. Because there was a part of you that said, no, no, I need to push on and start creating my next project. What allowed you to just relax and honor that your body was tired and need to just
Well, this is what
relax?
I wrote about in Writing Wild. I wrote about trusting yourself. I wrote mainly about paying attention. And you can only pay attention to the outer world going around you if you're very tuned into the inner world within. So I found myself just very briefly thinking about the shoulds. and that the culture was expecting me to do this because all of the questions with all the interviews were, and my friends, what are you writing now? What are you doing next? So I had this feeling that I was supposed to be doing that. And
Yes.
then I just remembered, what I'd been writing about, and that this was not appropriate for me. I needed to have inner time. I needed to be
Yeah.
gathering things.
Yeah. Yeah. And how did you deal with, because one of the questions that one of the listeners had is how long did it take you to write the book, and how does it take to write in this process? Because in a lot of ways we think, no, we just have to, we have to just keep on plugging along, right? When, even when you don't feel like writing, right? I looked at a lot of the conventional wisdom from writers of the past, and other, there seem to be two camps. There's kind of a camp that says, just keep on writing. Don't worry about what you're
Hmm.
writing, just write. Keep the juices flowing, because God forbid the creative juices aren't going. So there's one camp that's like,
Hmm.
keep on doing it. And then there's another camp that was more akin to what you did, which is you thought, it's really an unconscious process, and it's about honoring whatever your body wants to say. Here's actually, I found this quote that I really loved. There's one that's from the author of The Ender's Game, Orson Scott
Hmm.
Card. And he says, writer's block is never solved by forcing oneself to write through it, because you haven't solved the problem that caused your unconscious mind to rebel against a story. So it won't work for you or the reader. And so I think that that's kind of your camp and when you're like, let's not force it.
Yes.
And then there is a quote that I saw from Philip Pullman, and he said, he was making the analogy of a writer and a plumber, and he said, writing is just like plumbing. The fact is writing is hard work, and sometimes you don't want to do it, or you can't think of what to write next, or you're fed up with the whole damn business. Of course there will be days when the stuff is not free flowing. What you do then is make it up. Writer's block is a condition that affects amateurs and people who aren't serious about writing. So is the opposite, namely inspiration, which amateurs are also very fond of. Putting another way, a professional writer is someone who writes just as well when they're not inspired as when they are. So I thought, wow, these are two very different kind of camps.
Hmm.
Tell me how you feel, because you've worked with a lot of writers. I mean, what's your opinion
Yes.
on this?
My opinion is that I don't believe in the discipline. I think discipline is for dieters. I actually use that line in the novel. I don't think it's for creative work. However, I don't believe in writer's block, and I don't believe in the muse. I do think that when I talk about there being periods of taking in, I'm still a writer. I get to be a writer whether I have pen on paper or not. It is a way of being. It's a way of being present in the world, of just engaging your awareness. So, I may not be working on a particular goal-oriented writing project, but I'm dashing things off on my index cards and in my journal and whatever piece of
Mm-hmm.
paper I can grab wherever I
Mm-hmm.
happen to be. And I'm just engaged in that way because I do believe in the idea of labeling these things, of writing them down, pinning
Mm-hmm.
them in language. I love beautiful language, so sometimes it'll just be some word, some phrase that I will,
Mm-hmm.
grab onto. So
Mm-hmm.
I believe in being a writer, but I do not believe in pushing myself that way. I don't trust what comes from willpower.
Interesting. Okay, so I'm kind of imagining you, and I actually have talked to someone else who is a coach for people who are writers, and videographers, and all sorts of different people in Hollywood. And she has a very similar kind of process as yours. What she said that she does is she'll be walking along in the grocery store and like, I have the best idea, and she'll write it on a little index card, and then she actually takes all of her index cards and she puts them in a big envelope, and then kind of it's a germination period. It almost seems from her perspective. When I talk to her, it's like she has all these seeds of ideas, and she's taking these seeds and putting them in a big package for her to plant when the time is right. Is it like that for you, or something different? Like when you're sitting down and you're reading and you're taking notes, how would you describe that I don't know. It sounds like brainstorming to me, but how would you describe that process for yourself?
Well, I have a section in Writing Wild in which it's titled, Lessons from the Natural World, and one
Mm-hmm.
of them is very much that kind of process. And I think of it in terms of eggs that are being laid in a nest. So
Mm-hmm.
I do recommend that you get different envelopes or containers for your ideas like that,
Mm-hmm.
because so many times we'll get bottlenecked with a lot of ideas as writers.
Mm-hmm.
And if we can just, jot these things down as this woman does, and then put them in the various envelopes, we'll realize that one of the envelopes or two are gaining more of the energy, more of the
Yeah.
ideas.
Mm-hmm.
And so then you've got your start.
Yeah.
So I really like that idea, and I'm always working like that. And
Mm-hmm.
I have moved actually into a big metal kind of container for some of my notes. So something's building there. I haven't looked through it to see what it is because
Yeah.
I know I'm not ready. But as I'm not writing, so to speak, I am still living as a writer. I love to engage from that energy, so I'm reading, I'm eavesdropping because that's part of our job too. And I'm taking little notes and writing down things and tearing stuff out of newspapers and magazines, and so stuff is gathering, and
Mm-hmm.
there'll be a time when it will just mount to a place, and I'll feel that energy, and I'll know that I can just hardly wait to get started. I'm going to do something, and it's all going to
Ah,
be something that comes from my authentic self,
right.
not my willpower, not any shoulds, but just something that is my own passion, my own curiosity, and I can go a long ways on that kind of energy.
Yeah. And so really what you're doing is using your body as a cue when to start. Or is it also the visual cue? Like you go into the metal box and it's full. There's one box that you
No,
can't fit another thing in, or is it more of an energetic thing and how you're feeling
it's
about moving?
definitely an energetic thing. It doesn't matter how full that box is. If I don't feel a kind of magnetism to what's going on, something building there, then that's not for me. So
Yeah.
it's very much just kind of trusting yourself. It's being very attentive,
Hmm.
and then it's believing what it is that you hear and feel. And so many times I think that's where the problem starts, because as little children we're sent off to school, and all of our authority from that time on is in the outer world.
Yeah.
They
Yeah.
tell us what we should be doing, thinking, and feeling.
Hmm.
And so it's hard then to decide to be a creative person and tune back into the inner world, because there's still all of that power out there that says, well, this kind of book is selling really well. You should
Right.
maybe try to write that,
Right.
that
Yeah.
kind of thing. But that's not what we need to listen to if we really want to live fully and create well. And I think the living fully part is really needs to be at the top of the list anyway.
Yeah, one of the I'm seeing if I can find it right now. One of my favorite passages in your book is that you're talking about writers being like shamans, and shamans are those folks in indigenous cultures that were supposed to be the people who would be pulling information from the heavens and spirits and also from the earth. And I'm going to read a little passage I like that you wrote that reminded me, our conversation reminded you said, as writers, we play the same role in our society as a shaman does in native societies. We reflect thought and action back to people in our community in a non aggressive, sometimes humorous way. We bring into
Mm-hmm.
consciousness and put into words what otherwise might remain in the unspoken unconsciousness of ourselves and our community. Just as it is the job of the shamans in native cultures to announce the larger patterns, the weather, the movement of the herds that feed the tribe, we are the ones assigned to be most awake. This is our contribution. We notice and alert the people to ideas, feelings, movements, and changes that are in their transpersonal consciousness. I love that because it really
Oh,
changes
thank
the
you.
nature of writing, right?
Well, I think so. I felt like it got it down to its organic core to some extent, because what we bring into the light we can work with, what remains
Hmm.
in the dark works us.
Hmm.
So if writers are the ones who are really out there paying attention, if they're feeling that their job is to be very awake and very aware, then they're going to be alerted to things the other people who are busy with their lives and not so tuned in um, can learn from,
Mm-hmm.
or be tuned into through the writer marking this down, noting it,
Mm-hmm.
pointing to it, kind of.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, I love the whole idea because to me, so recently I've had to do writing, which I don't necessarily enjoy. And, my frame in thinking about writing is like, oh no, I have to write for business and I hate doing writing and I'm not a good writer, blah blah, like a thousand different negative
Mm.
negative thoughts come popping into my head. And then what's interesting when I put it into the frame of I'm actually talking to a dear friend and I'm sharing something that is really, really important for them to understand and to kind of shift their perspective. And if I put it in the frame of a shaman where I'm actually trying to take information that I've really enjoyed and knowledge and perspective and take the information from what I'm feeling at the highest level on a spiritual level, taking that information from a really grounded earth place, and then combining it with my own experience, that really is the true creative process, right? Which I think is what you
Yes,
talk about in your book. Um,
yes,
Very few of us think of it that way,
yes.
do we, though? I mean, I don't think a lot of people think about it. They think of it as a job that they need to produce on a certain deadline.
Right. Or please a certain number of people, or sell a certain number of books, and that whole thing. And that's just sort of arcing out our attention to the outside. Actually, we're dealing with the outcome instead of the process, and the outcome, in my opinion, is just really none of our business.
Okay, so really it's just about the process then. It's a process, the creative process that is coming through us, right? And honoring
Yeah.
the various pieces that are happening within us. So how do we do that? Walk us through. I really like one of the examples that you gave in the very, very, very first, the spirit walks. Tell us how you may take a spirit walk and use that as a way of kind of generating that creative energy.
Okay, so a spirit walk has three simple steps to it, and it correlates with the three parts of our brain, so there's something organically authentic about it.
Mm-hmm.
The first thing is when you're out walking, just out in your backyard, a schoolyard, a park, the wilderness, is to just open up your senses. Stand still for a moment and take it all in, all five senses: sight,
Mm-hmm.
sound, smell, taste something, touch something, and just get alert and get your body into the place. And then next, I wander off a little bit for a while, and then I'll choose one particular thing. And in writing Wild, I use the example of a pine cone.
Mm-hmm.
So I pick up this pine cone and I smell it. I run my fingernail or thumbnail down through it next to my ear to see what the sound is like. And I even taste it. And I go through all of that so that I'm also then becoming more aware of my body comfort. Take kind of a body scan so that
Mm-hmm.
I'm interacting with this pine cone in some level. I have created something of a relationship with it.
Mm-hmm.
And at the same time, brought myself into a sense of the moment. So the next thing, you don't have to do anything at all. It just happens automatically. Um, I call it interaction, and it's that time when, because we're there, because we're present and awake and paying attention, things just arise freely, the way they do when you're with a really good, trusted friend. You
Mm-hmm.
suddenly remember stuff, or you find yourself telling stories or
Mm.
something that's happened to you that you had no intention of talking about. And it's because you trust this person, because their energy allows your energy to sort of diffuse and feel safe at expression. And the same thing happens in the natural world, that you're outside and everything is just so alive that these memories will come up, emotions will come up. And if you've got pen and paper in your hand, wham, just start writing, because important stuff happens and
Mm.
things come up that you're not aware of. And it's that comfort level and that attention that does the job.
Mm. Now, give us some examples of things if you should. Hopefully, they're not too private. But what are some things that came up that you thought, ah, this is going to end up being in my book, or oh, this is a great book idea. Help us translate what happens from that, from the moment, the various steps of, oh, I'm labeling and I'm aware of what's happening. I'm going very deeply into one object, the pine cone, and then boom,
Hmm.
ideas. Give us an example of what kind of things we could expect happens. And I know it will be different for each person, but give us examples
Yeah.
of stuff that's happened to you.
And I wouldn't say necessarily it's a boom because then we're kind of expecting something big, and
Right.
showy. And it's not like that. The
Okay.
first inclination is to discard this,
Mm.
because it comes up softly and it comes up quietly, and you just think, yeah, but that's not important,
Mm.
you know. And so the first urge is to do that. And I always just tell my students, what if archaeologists did this? Oh, this is just a little sliver of bone. Oh, this is just a little shard of pottery, and tossed it. We wouldn't know anything about the history of
Yes.
civilization. And it's the same thing with us. So that, I can walk along and I'm just touching this leaf, and then I decide I'm going to even taste it, and
Hmm.
I'm just engaging, and suddenly I realize this thing is so beautiful. It's just a leaf and it's beginning to die, actually, but that means there's new color that's coming out of it. And pretty soon this um, memory just comes up of me being like 3 or 4, and we lived in St. Louis at the time, and I remember my mother saying, now the owner of the house is going to come by and visit today, and if she's got a rag around her head, that means you're not supposed to talk to her. Well, I had totally forgotten. And this woman's name was Mildred,
Uh-huh.
and that's what she'd do. But I never believed my mother, and I can remember just kind of testing that, hello, Mildred,
Yeah.
talking to her anyway. And then that moved into other feelings of how unstable in a way my family was at the time, just because
Hmm.
my parents were very young and we were renting this shoddy little house. So those other things come up, and you get different visions then. It's just a whole other facet of looking at your beginnings and how that maybe shades different things. It's so informative.
Yeah. And did that end up going, is that the fodder to be used in your stories, or is that just, gosh, it's just nice to remember that experience?
No, I end up using so much of that kind of thing. Self knowledge, of course, is very important for any kind of creative work. But even in fiction, all of us fiction writers like to say, no, there isn't anything that's truthful in there. There isn't any real people
Yeah.
in there. And that's true to an extent, but there's always this emotional truth. So everything that is in my novels comes from some kind of an emotional truth. And for
Mm.
example, my first novel was Crybaby Ranch, and the mother did have early onset Alzheimer's, and my mother did.
Hmm.
But that was not my mother, and that was not me. Because what happens in the process of writing is that, first of all, I experienced this, and I was journaling to help myself through it and help my mother through it. But over the years of then turning what I understood about that disease and what that does to a relationship between a mother and a daughter, it turns it into something universal because you're reworking it and pulling in your other fictional stories, so everything's totally colored in a way that is
Ah.
not biographical, and yet there's this emotional truth,
Ah, I
and you
get it.
have to have that for fiction to really resonate with readers.
Ah, okay, got it. I get it. So those experiences, like the one of, the leaf reminded you of your mother and reminded you of Mildred, that was kind of like, it's kind of a textural element, like an emotion that then you can actually pull up when you're writing about a character that you did in, Crybaby Ranch about your mom. It's like,
Hmm.
I feel the emotional texture and flavor, and and maybe not be exactly the same thing, but you can kind of feel your own personal experiential sense of being in that place. That's what I'm
Yes,
picking up. Is
right.
that right? Is that what you
That's
mean?
right. And because it's quirky that there was this woman who tied a rag around her head when she
Yeah.
didn't want anybody to talk to her, that part might come up in some future project too, just because
Yeah,
I think
I see.
that's different. That's unique. And
Oh,
I didn't
okay.
even remember that, it was so many years ago. But then
Ah,
also you can take these things and flip them into their opposite. And I talk about this writing Wild as well. So
Yeah.
my father was living at the time I was writing Crybaby Ranch, and I needed to have a father character that was quite controlling, and powerful in the woman's life, but I didn't want to be writing about my father. So I thought about him, and I realized he was a man who was constantly way ahead of schedule. I mean, if he was going to take you out to dinner, he's honking the horn 40 minutes ahead of time. If he was going to visit me in Jackson Hole in August, I'd start feeling like he was lurking around the valley in July, So he was controlling in that way. So I
Yeah.
flipped it, and I made the father always late. And it worked the same way. He was still controlling. He was still annoying in his way, intrusive in his way. And
Yes.
yet, no one knew, of course, that I was learning all this and writing really because I understood my father more than any other man at that point.
Yeah. Oh, that's fascinating. So, a lot of these are almost like I'm imagining that you have this quilt and you're taking these little pieces of fabric from your own life and kind of sewing them together into a beautiful quilt that's its own unique thing, right? It's not necessarily your
Yeah.
life, but it has all these little patches that relate to some emotional quality in your life.
And I may be embroidering over those too, so that, there's a whole other layer of stuff that's completely fictional,
Hmm.
if I'm working on a novel or short story. So,
Yeah.
yeah, but there's always some layer in there that is absolute truth, so that it holds that energy that started you writing that in the beginning.
Oh, I love it. Okay, so that's how come when you say there's no muse, it's really the energy that's pulling you, maybe that emotion of, oh gosh, that just frustrates me that my dad's there 45, he's so controlling, so that may be
Uh-huh.
it's not if that's that's the thing. It's not a muse, it's not something that's mysterious. It's something that pops up inside of you that wants to
Yeah,
be communicated to another person. Did I get that right?
right.
Yeah.
Right, exactly. So it's always been a mystery to me and to most of us about
Mhm.
creative energy.
Mhm.
Most people, most of the writers seem to not want to look at it. The writers that I encountered, through the um, conference, Jackson Hole Writers Conference, or any other, thing that I was involved in throughout my early years. And I felt like, no, this can't be. This has to be safe to look at. And I do talk about that in Writing Wild, how throughout, history there have been writers who have done such strange things like Dame Edith Sitwell, who had to put herself inside of a coffin before she could start writing every
Right.
morning. I mean, those kinds of things. So we're just always
Right.
finding ways to arc our energy outside of ourselves and giving all that authority out there so that, things have to be just
Ah.
right before then it's going to be released within us. Well, I just thought, that sounds a little shaky to me, and I wanted to just figure it out. So I
Mm.
would go through my writing, and I would see that I had come up with a metaphor, and I'd break that down, how two different memories or
Mm.
images that I spotted just came together, and mated and made a
Mm.
third thing, really.
Mhm.
And
Yeah.
so anybody can do that with any of their work. It's just that I think a lot of people are afraid to look at what's mysterious to them because then maybe it'll go away.
Okay, so when you're saying, and I wanted to ask a follow-up question. You were talking about people in your workshop saying having a hard time going into it. Is the it their emotions, or and are they afraid that if they go into their emotions it will go away? I don't understand because I'm not a writer, but what does that mean?
Okay. Well, I meant go into that source of creative energy.
Ah,
Because
okay.
for um, young writers or new writers, it's just mysterious. And they write something and they fall in love with it and they don't want to touch it. But when you spend a lot of years writing, you realize that all the magic happens really with the rewriting, with the time that you spend with it, that you don't need to have all of these superstitions about it. Sometimes when we first start writing, we just feel like what we've just done is just so precious,
Mm-hmm.
and we don't know where it came from, and we feel a little bit in awe of it, and we
Mm-hmm.
want it to happen again because it feels good.
Mm-hmm.
But we don't know how it happened, so then we think, well,
Oh.
I was wearing that red plaid shirt, maybe I better put that on again.
I'll wear that and then step into the coffin and see if that those
Right,
two things in
right,
combination work.
yes,
Interesting. Okay, got it. So, so I'm hearing another huge point. So the other huge point I'm hearing, and you've said it, and you've said it in a lot of different ways, is that we often feel that the power in our writing comes from outside of ourselves. What do other people think? But it's really about what's going on inside of ourselves where the power of the writing comes. It,
yes,
okay, that's a huge
absolutely.
thing because, and there's a in your book writing wild that contains there was a question earlier asking, gosh, what is the book about? And it's about many things. But in the it's about and let me do a quick summary in terms of what it was about for me, and then I want to talk about one of the passages that I really enjoyed. um, the book actually, to answer the question of the people, there are people who are chatting with me while I'm talking to you. So,
Mm.
so one of the questions is, what's the book about? And the book really is about, I think, almost a way of living, as much as it is a way of living and interacting here on Earth, as it is about a way of creatively expressing yourself. I don't know. That was my expression of it. How would you describe your book?
I like that very much.
Okay.
I like that description. And also, I think of it sometimes as just really a book about our spiritual lives, thinly described as a book about writing.
Yeah.
And I think really I went back and forth about whether to address it only to writers or to all creative people, but writing is what I knew about. And
Yeah.
so I did go with what I felt the most comfortable and confident about, but it's a very much about a way of living.
Yeah.
And I think a way of living that is creative. It doesn't mean that you have to be a writer, you have to be a painter. Being a business person is creative. Doing your work is very creative. We're always working from that creative energy, and it's a very alive place, always
Yeah.
changing,
Mhm.
always growing. And I think it's the thing that can educate us and enlarge us.
Hmm. One of the things that I was talking to my husband, who is a writer, about, and that he really enjoyed, and that I enjoyed as well in your book, and this is harking back to what we were just talking about, is the process of going inside and then outside, and kind of almost like a wave. You're talking
Mm.
about stating the factual pieces. She was walking down the street and then going on the inside, and kind of like she was walking down the street and in a cold Boston night, and then she's kind of going in and inside, and it reminded her of her the coldness she felt on the inside, as whatever. I
Yeah.
mean, but it's like you're going from the outside, her walking on the street in the cold Boston night, to the inside, which is, and she felt all alone, as if
Mhm.
she didn't exist on this earth, something like that. But it's kind of the outside and inside, the interplay between going in the outside world, recognizing it's there, but then also going into your internal experience and sharing that. I think that's really important. I enjoyed that part of the book. Tell me a little bit more about it from your perspective, since you wrote the book.
Okay. Well, I loved it when I came upon that piece. I think it's a wholly original thing that is in Writing Wild. And what I love most about this idea or realization that I came up with is that it works on a health level for journal writing, for writing
Hmm.
in order to heal your life, your body, and it works for really the most beautiful writing that we love to read. So
Hmm.
the idea is that it's our attention. It's like breathing. Our attention goes out, our attention goes in. If we're reading a novel, for example, and the writer goes on and on, page after page, about how beautiful the mountains are, we just kind of think, okay, so they're beautiful mountains, let's go on. If the writer is writing about his emotional life and on about that for pages, we're going to have the same reaction. But when you
Yeah.
weave those two things together, it makes them both alive.
Mm-hmm.
So I also discovered that Dr. Pennebaker had done a lot of research on this idea of journaling and healing. So he had 3 different control groups, and he would have one of them write about a trauma, only describing its outer details, another group writing only about the emotional impact of this trauma, and then the third group wrote about both. And so, for example, if it were a traumatic car accident, you would be writing in your journal, and this is for healing, I saw the car cross the line, my stomach, then you're back into your body, my stomach clenched. The car got closer. It was a red car. A man was driving it. My chest got all hot. My hands got clammy. I got very fearful. And on like that, and then outward again about the car and what was going on. And then inward. It's not like you have to have any particular formula of 2 sentences or 3 observations in and then 3 out. It's just that you get that kind of a, like you said, a wave effect, that sort of breathing in, breathing out. And Dr. Pennebaker realized that if the group people wrote for 15 minutes a day, 4 days in a row, that their immune system was stronger for 6 weeks following this.
When they wrote it in that way, that when they actually wrote both the facts.
Yes, when you wrote in that way.
Yes.
The inner, the outer attention, just going back and forth. And so the immune system stronger, high blood pressure lowers, people who were shut out of their jobs find them faster. It's a way of stopping that tape that goes around in your head during, because of a trauma, and writing it down and feeling it, and it can be painful sometimes the first hour after you do this, and then life improves.
I have a theory about all of this. Do you want to hear it? Because I was talking about, I was sharing this passage with my husband, and my theory is that, okay, at the highest level, at the highest spiritual level, my personal belief is that we're here on this earth to experience things. We're here to experience life itself. And so when you actually write in that way, what happens is you're writing about the facts, the car, it was a red car. And so I'm hearing the facts. And then what happens is my unconscious mind is trying to make meaning of that. And then you say, my heart clenched. So I'm going, well, wait a second. Why did her heart clench? And my mind can't help but try to make meaning out of that. And now at an unconscious level, I'm enrolled in the whole thing, right? I'm enrolled because I'm experiencing the same experience that you're experiencing, because you're taking me along with your journey, but I'm experiencing my version of that. Does that make sense? Because I had talked to a songwriter. I've interviewed several different people on the creative process. One was Paul Ellis, and I said, you wrote the song about X person sitting on a bar stool, and he said, yeah, and it meant this to me. And I was like, well, when your listeners listen, what does it mean to them? He's like, oh, I'm always shocked. It means like 1,500 different things to my readers, because they're listening to the same words. And they're drawing their own personal experience into the song. So they're experiencing something in life. At the highest level, they're experiencing something in life, and it's because you're describing the factual detail, but you're also filling in your own details, so they kind of can experience it with you. So I think that's why it's healing. That's my theory. Does that make sense?
I like your theory, and I really think you're on it, because I don't think we actually have to experience every darn thing.
No.
I think our imagination can do a lot of this for us.
Yeah.
So if we're here on Earth to experience life at its fullest, well, the news helps us do that. If we want to really get into what's going on, and try to imagine those situations. Songs do that, like you say.
Movies.
We have all of these things that can teach us as much as we want to take in.
Yeah, I had interviewed Dawson Church, who is a person on EFT, and he's talking about motor neurons, and that our brains are just oriented towards doing that kind of I want to experience what you're experiencing. So, or no, mirror neurons kind of go and say, well, I want to experience that too. Take me along on that car ride. What was it like?
Mm-hmm.
What, oh gosh, my heart
Mm-hmm.
would be clenching, and then my heart, I'd be breathing fast too. It's that
Yes.
same kind of process. Anyways, I could talk on and on about this, but I promised in the folks that I wanted to cover some of the most critical problems that people have. So one of the problems that people have is they have writer's block. And you said earlier you don't believe in writer's block. And I wonder whether that's because you're writing from a creative process, so you're never blocked. I mean, why don't you believe in writer's
Well,
block?
I don't believe in writer's block because of my own experience, because of course I get to a place where I'm stopped. But I think what it does is inject a kind of fear. I
Mm,
think oftentimes we feel writer's block. I notice particularly with my students,
hmm
they're blocked and they start talking about what other people think about them, their work, or they start letting the judges, their own mental judges, into the process way
hmm
too soon. And I
hmm
think those are the two things that are really blocking us. We've
Ah.
art we've arced over to the outcome instead, of just sticking with the process. So if we're writing and then we stop and we look at it and analyze it, we look at it with those nasty judges in our heads, well, we're just going to be stopped. And those judges have to be booted out. They are not invited. It's inappropriate for them to be in the process at that point. You are just writing, and you get to write all the crappy stuff you want. I mean, there was a time in my career, and there's times now in which I think, if I get hit by a truck and somebody reads this, they are just going to pity me, thinking, the poor thing, she thinks she's a writer. So we have those fears, and then we think,
Right.
oh gosh, this is really bad. If somebody else read it, they'd think this and they'd think that. Well, that's just awfully inappropriate too.
Ah.
We just have to be kind talkers to ourselves. We have to ease ourselves through things. We have a longing, and we need to express that longing.
Ah.
We
So
need to
so
follow that
writers
longing so
writer's
that we
block
can
is our
fulfill
mind.
ourselves.
Yeah, the writer's block is our mind running amok and our judgmental mind actually judging what is true for us and what we're experiencing at the moment. That's the writer's
Coming
block.
in too early. Yes.
Yeah, okay, coming in too early. Okay, but all right, so then there's another question which I saw that was pretty common, which is, well, and let me actually go back to the first. So in the beginning process, in the ideation process, I hear people saying I have writer's block, and I just don't feel it. I don't feel creative, or I feel under the gun. I have a deadline. I feel depressed or unmotivated. And what would you say to that then? Is it go curl you up in the blanket and sitting on your porch swing? I mean, what should people do?
Well, yeah, I think, yes, take care of yourself. It's okay. Production's not the whole thing. That's only the sort of like the last part of it. The whole thing has to do with how you're feeling and if you're depressed. And yes, I think that's another place where the natural world comes in and takes care of us. We go out there, we give ourselves over to it. We start to notice the light and how it's bouncing off of everything and just lighting up the world. And if you look at the light, whether it's bouncing off of bare branches with no darn leaves on them at all and the sky's clouded over, you're still uplifted because we are just creatures of light, I think.
Mm,
And so we let ourselves just be open and vulnerable. Creative people must be vulnerable, and we're
mm.
going to have these hard times too, these difficult feelings. But that's being human, and we need to deal with it, and the whole goal is not to be productive. And we just need to remind
Ah,
ourselves
okay.
of
So
that.
so if you're feeling this kind of block, I'm hearing two different solutions. One is just go with it. Go with it, flow with it, and have faith that it will return. The energy for writing will return. That's one solution I
Hmm.
hear. And then the other solution I hear is, you know what? Go out in nature. Be present to what's happening. And who knows, when you're present to what's happening, maybe something else will happen. When you let go of all your discursive thoughts, well, I have a deadline, I'm depressed, how can I write? I'm under the gun, ma! Like that's you going into your mind versus being present at the moment, which how it can energy come to you if you're kind of like sitting there with a clenched fist trying to let energy come through you. So go out, take a
That's
walk. That's what I'm hearing is your
that's
second
the puzzle.
solution.
Yes, go out, take a walk. You gotta learn how to open ourselves up because life is hard, and there's always going to be difficult things coming along that is going to want to clench us up.
Right.
And so maybe that's one of our goals in life, is just to learn how to unclench no matter what's going
Right.
on.
Right.
You know?
Okay, so now I have a question. So when does that judgmental critic? Because I just actually I was writing an article just recently, and I kind of let it flow, and then I read it, and I'm like, what the heck was I writing
Uh-huh.
about? And then I went back and edited it because there wasn't a flow. It didn't make sense. There was no logical order to it. So I mean, you have to go back and kind of knit the pieces together, don't you? In your crazy
Oh,
quilt.
yeah. There is absolutely a time for those judges to come in, and they've got big work to do, you know.
Yeah.
And I spend a lot of time with the judges. I do a lot of rewriting, just
Yeah.
rewriting. I think that's where the art comes in, you know, just that polishing, that pulling things together. And you don't have to really worry about this numbing out to it because of the repetition. If it's a good piece, it holds energy for you. It will hold that energy no matter. I mean, I wrote Writing Wild, the first draft, 15 years ago. I probably
Wow.
finished it 12 years ago. You know, so I have gone through it hundreds of times. It
Wow.
still holds energy to me. Saturday during my day-long workshop, I could talk about the subjects in there, and they're still alive for me.
Mm.
So I think that's a good test.
Mm.
And,
Yeah, I like
you
that
know, we
idea. So,
definitely, yeah.
yeah. So in the one of my questions was that I see is very common is when do I stop editing or when do I stop painting, right? Is that kind of like when do you just drop
Hmm.
the paintbrush, the pen and say I'm done? And what I'm hearing you
Yep.
say is when your energy is no longer there to complete it, you're done. Is
Yes,
that
there's
right?
something, well, I just find that it does something for me, you know, and
Yeah.
it's time to step away. I never write up to a deadline. I don't trust that, you know,
Yeah.
because that's just all that other urgent and energy, and you're inviting that whole willpower thing and the discipline to come in, you know. So I like to beat deadlines way ahead of time, so that I can trust what my reaction is. And there just comes a time where I feel like this is my best. I
Yeah.
could go through there and probably move some commas around, but I'm going to let this go now.
Yeah. So you kind of it's more of an internal felt sense that you're done. Right? You're like I'm done
Exactly.
because I'm done and I'm not going to go fix this and that and move that chapter. Okay, this is good enough.
Hmm.
And that's what I did this just morning. I'm like stop touching this. Yeah, you
Yes.
start creating a Frankenstein if you touch it one more time. So,
Right,
so
right.
when
It's
you
just
have
artificial.
how do you know that you have you don't have your Frankenstein? I mean, that you don't have your perfectionist tendencies just kind of running amok. Do you have a guide on knowing that?
Well, that's not been a particular issue of mine, and I do have this favorite saying that I wrote about in Writing Wild: lower your standards.
Yes.
And that just frees me up, you know. I mean, I'm not saying that it's a total body sense that lets me know that my work is done. I certainly use my intellect there, and all that I know about writing and all that I admire about other writers' work and so forth to make my, you know, discernments over whether it's time to let a piece go or not.
Yeah.
But sometimes I do have to say to myself, you know, lower your standards, let this go, because you just, I can tell I'm getting low on a sense of aliveness in connection
Mm-hmm.
with it. You
Yeah.
know, that if I went on, I would turn it into something that wasn't authentic. That
Mm.
it's kind of like plucking your eyebrows too much or doing anything too much. You know, you lose that sense of um, aliveness. You
Yeah,
know,
no,
just
I
that
actually think
whole.
that's huge. That's huge when you're like, I'm no longer authentically portraying what I really want to portray. I can feel
Hmm.
it because my energy doesn't feel right. And that was actually what was happening. I'm like, it doesn't feel right to me, this article. So I went back and edited it one more time. And then I'm like, okay, that's me. That's me. That's what I want to
Yeah,
say. And I'm done. So I think that that's a good cue. Does it feel like
yeah.
your authentic self is being expressed? Because ultimately, that's what you're trying to do, right? Express your creative self, creation
That's
through
what's going to be
yourself.
satisfying to you. Yes, that's what
Yes.
makes you feel like I have completed this job. You know, I'm not doing something somebody else is doing or trying to do it like them. You know, this
Right.
is me good or bad, there you are.
I love it. All right, we've been talking to Tina Welling, and we're talking about her book, Writing Wild. Make sure to get it. You can tell us about your website, Tina.
Yes, www.tinawelling.com.
WELLING.com and TINA,
Very
of
good,
course,
thank you.
TinaWelling.com. Thank you so much for being here. That was fantastic. I got a lot of good
Oh,
writing
thank you.
tips. Yeah, and then
It means so much to me that you're listening to the show. Would love your support in any way by giving me comments below or to subscribe to the show or share the show with friends. Thank you again for your support. Love and blessings.